Good afternoon, comrades from here in New York and whatever time it is where you are in the world right now. We want to thank the organizers for inviting us to participate in this important event. As Davey said at the beginning of the meeting, there are turning points in history, right, where the principles of organizations and individuals get tested and clarified. And this is one of those moments. It's been coming for a while. And some of us who have been, deeply engaged in the struggle around Ukraine and Donbass over the last 8 years have been, trying to put up an alarm around it. And certainly here in the US, it's been very difficult to get any traction. And now we're seeing the consequences of that. In the past month, we've seen so many anti-war and left formations bow to the intense pressure of imperialist propaganda and catering to the cowardice of funders and fellow travelers ahead of anti-imperialism and the interests of the workers and oppressed. The other side of that coin is that the war crisis is separating the wheat from the chaff. Leaders and organizations that have coasted through recent years and decades on past accomplishments are now forced to show where they really stand. And at the same time, I think as this forum is an example, groups that maybe were separated by historical differences and secondary issues may now find a new basis to work together and learn from each other. The Socialist Unity Party and Struggle La Lucha newspaper called for the victory of the Donbass republics and Russia in their defensive joint military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. What this really means is to end the 8-year genocidal war against the people of Donbass, to remove the neo-Nazi boot heel from the neck of the Ukrainian people, to reverse Ukraine's transformation into a NATO war base that poses a constant threat to Russia, and return it to the formally neutral status before the coup of 2014. We call for the defeat of US imperialism, which instigated this war and is a combatant in it as surely as it is in Yemen or anywhere else Washington's proxy wars are carried out. After this week's NATO summit, the imperialists are moving closer to direct intervention, which of course could, as we all know, could precipitate an unprecedented global war. We think it's very important to elevate the struggle of the people of the Donbass region, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. Too often, their struggle is ignored by the left, or following the lead of the corporate media, is written off merely as Russian separatists or Putin's proxies. But such a view can only be argued by people who are, completely ignorant of the Donbass and the anti-fascist struggle of the people there over the last 8 years. How they've persevered through constant terror by the Ukrainian armed forces and the neo-Nazi battalions, how they've survived through, a very brutal blockade, how it draws upon the deep traditions of internationalism and anti-fascism inherited from the Soviet people, and how that resistance found an echo in Russia. Or it's argued only by those who know better but are adapting their views to the needs of imperialism, which is much of what we see in the movement right now. Revolutionary Marxists look below the surface to understand the class forces and contradictions at work. Those who focus on Putin and the Russian capitalists' reactionary ideology ignore the dialectical relationship between Russia's struggle to maintain its sovereignty against the US and NATO and the anti-fascist struggle in Donbass and Ukraine. That same dynamic exists on a global scale. Looking at it purely on the surface level of political pronouncements, you could come to the conclusion that there's little difference between Russia and Bolsonaro's Brazil or Modi's India. But unlike those countries whose ruling classes are fundamentally tied to imperialism, the life and death struggle of Russia, not to be dissected and swallowed up, by imperialism has pushed it into the camp of countries and movements resisting the US, including Venezuela, Cuba, China, the DPRK, Syria, Yemen, and Iran. With our modest forces here in the US, we're doing what we can to clarify the issues and bring a genuine anti-war position to the working class. We've launched a campaign called Stop the War Lies, which is aimed at exposing the US-NATO role in Ukraine, exposing imperialism's cozy relationship with the Ukrainian fascists, educating about the cause of Donbass, and exposing how Wall Street, big oil, and the military industry profit from the war at the expense of people here. We and allied groups have been getting out into communities with fact sheets, holding picket lines and speakouts. Just last night, our comrades in the city of Baltimore held a rush hour banner drop and leafleting action. Today, folks in New Orleans and San Diego are doing community outreach. And next weekend, on April 2nd, which is the anniversary weekend of Martin Luther King's assassination, we're building protests in New York and Los Angeles. Also tomorrow, March 27th, we're organizing a webinar featuring speakers from Donbass to help inform the anti-war movement and the left in the US about the reality of the US-Ukraine war. And we're working on a speaking tour for this spring. Those are some of the actual concrete things we're working on right now. We invite organizations here on this call to join in this effort. We're open to collaborating with groups here in the US and internationally. This is a moment to overcome secondary differences and build a united front against imperialism and war that can lay the foundation for future revolutionary struggles. Thanks again.